Return of the Jedi, the triumphant conclusion to George Lucas's original Star Wars trilogy, a film that forever changed cinema and defined a generation of moviegoers. But beneath its triumphant Ewok celebration and Vader's redemption lies a complicated, untold story most fans never glimpsed. What if what you saw on screen was only half the battle? What if the cast who brought these iconic characters to life were fighting their own wars behind the scenes? Wars that fundamentally shaped the Star Wars saga as we know it today? Let's pull back the curtain on the galaxy far, far away and examine what really happened during the making of this beloved classic. The struggles, the sacrifices, and the studio battles that transformed not just the film, but the people who made it. It's 1982. The Empire Strikes Back has left audiences worldwide with the greatest cinematic cliffhanger of all time. Darth Vader is Luke's father. Han Solo is frozen in carbonite. The rebellion is on the run, and expectations for the trilogy's conclusion couldn't possibly be higher. George Lucas, still reeling from the grueling production of The Empire Strikes Back, makes a pivotal decision. He won't direct this final chapter himself, passing the helm to Richard Marquand, a relatively unknown British filmmaker. Lucas would remain heavily involved, but this choice would set the stage for a complex creative dynamic that would define the production. The pressure is immense. Star Wars has transformed from a surprise hit to a cultural phenomenon, and with that transformation came unprecedented commercial interests. Toy sales alone have reached astronomical numbers, with Kenner Products shipping over 250 million Star Wars action figures by 1982. What began as Lucas's deeply personal vision has become a corporate juggernaut. Meanwhile, the cast returns to their roles carrying both the triumph of their previous performances and the weight of bringing this saga to a satisfying conclusion. Harrison Ford, Mark Hamill, and Carrie Fisher are no longer the unknowns they were in 1977. They're global stars, bringing their own evolving perspectives to characters that have become cultural icons. And so begins the production of what was initially titled Revenge of the Jedi, a film caught between artistic vision and commercial reality, between concluding a story and launching a franchise that would never truly end. Harrison Ford strides onto set, embodying the swagger of Han Solo, the character who made him a household name. But here's what most fans never realized. Ford was fighting a private battle with the role that defined his career. "I thought the character should die," Ford would later reveal in interviews. "I thought he should sacrifice himself for the other characters." This wasn't mere actor's vanity. Ford believed Han's death would give emotional weight to the trilogy's conclusion, providing real stakes in a fantastical universe. But Lucas had other ideas and other merchandising concerns. The tension between Ford's artistic instincts and the commercial realities of Star Wars created a fascinating undercurrent in his performance. Watch his scenes again. There's a subtle weariness beneath Solo's trademark confidence, a complexity that enriches every frame he occupies. Mark Hamill faced his own paradox. To audiences, he was the embodiment of heroic optimism as Luke Skywalker. Yet on set, he found himself increasingly questioning the direction of his character. The script called for Luke to emerge as a confident Jedi Knight, but Hamill sensed potential for something deeper, the lingering vulnerability beneath Luke's newfound power. "I remember arguing with George about Luke's reaction to Yoda's death," Hamill would later recall. "I felt it should be more emotional, more conflicted." These quiet battles over interpretation created a fascinating tension in Skywalker's journey, one that adds layers most viewers never consciously recognize. But perhaps the most profound persona paradox belonged to Carrie Fisher. On screen, Princess Leia radiates strength, leadership, and resilience. Off camera, Fisher was navigating her own complex struggles with substance abuse and bipolar disorder, challenges she would later document with raw honesty in her memoirs. During filming of Return of the Jedi in 1982, Fisher was 25 years old and battling addiction issues she wouldn't publicly acknowledge until years later. She would later describe this period as the middle of my life before I woke up. The contrast between Leia's composed authority and Fisher's private chaos creates an almost unbearable poignancy when you know what to look for. Watch her performance through this lens, and you'll see something remarkable. How Fisher channeled her own battles into Leia's strength, transforming personal demons into one of cinema's most enduring heroines. Behind the triumphant smiles of the trilogy's conclusion lay three performers reckoning with the characters that would forever define them, and the price of immortality none of them could have anticipated. May 1981. Pre-production on the final Star Wars film is in full swing when Lucas makes an announcement that sends shockwaves through the production team. The working title, Revenge of the Jedi, has already appeared on early promotional materials, but Lucas has second thoughts. Jedi don't seek revenge, he declares. The film will instead be titled Return of the Jedi. This seemingly simple change reveals a profound struggle at the heart of the production, a battle between darkness and light, not just within the story, but within Lucas's vision for how the trilogy should conclude. The original title suggested a harder edge, a more aggressive stance for the film's heroes. The revision signaled a pivot toward redemption and restoration. But that's merely the most visible change. Behind closed doors, a far more consequential decision was unfolding, one that would fundamentally reshape the film's emotional core. Early drafts of Lawrence Kasdan and George Lucas's screenplay contained a dramatically different ending. Luke would walk away alone, like a gunslinger into the sunset, with Han and Leia dead. The Empire would be defeated, but at a devastating cost. It was bleak, powerful, and utterly unlike the celebration that made it to screen. What happened? The answer lies at the intersection of artistic vision and commercial reality. Kenner Products' Star Wars toy line had generated over $100 million in revenue annually since 1978. By 1982, Star Wars merchandise had become a significant consideration in narrative decisions, with character deaths potentially impacting future merchandising opportunities. Gary Kurtz, producer of the first two Star Wars films, later revealed the shift. The original ending of Return of the Jedi was quite bittersweet and poignant. But George eventually decided that he didn't want any of the principals killed. By that time, there were really big toy sales, and that was a reason. This pivotal decision, choosing a more uplifting conclusion over the originally planned bittersweet ending, reverberates through every frame of the final film. The jubilant Ewok celebration, Vader's redemptive sacrifice that nonetheless spares Luke true loss, the neat resolution of character arcs, all stem from this fundamental choice to prioritize hope over hardship. And with this decision, the template for modern franchise filmmaking was established. Emotional safety became the guardrail for blockbuster storytelling. The darker path not taken haunts Return of the Jedi like a shadow, visible only when you know to look for it. The sweltering Yuma Desert stands in for Tatooine. Inside Jabba's palace set, the temperature regularly exceeds 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Cast members in alien prosthetics suffer in silence, some requiring oxygen between takes. This is the physical reality of making movie magic in 1982. Carrie Fisher, encased in the now infamous metal bikini, endures not just the heat, but also the physical discomfort of a costume designed primarily for visual impact. The metal bikini was what we call in the business a slave Leia costume. Fisher would later explain, with characteristic candor, "I hated wearing it. and hated the way I looked in it. I have never had a comfortable moment in it. That discomfort translates into something powerful on screen, a tension in Fisher's performance that adds layers to Leia's captivity. What audiences see as merely an iconic costume was, for the actress, a physical manifestation of the objectification she often felt in Hollywood. Meanwhile, Mark Hamill faces a different challenge. Returning as Luke Skywalker meant embodying a character who had dramatically evolved since The Empire Strikes Back. I had to find a way to play someone who had gained significant power but was still vulnerable to darkness, Hamill would later explain. It was a complex psychological tightrope. That complexity was compounded by production realities. Key emotional scenes were often filmed out of sequence, requiring actors to mentally jump between different points in their characters' arcs. The pivotal confrontation between Luke, Vader, and the Emperor was shot over weeks, with actors having to maintain emotional continuity through countless technical delays. For the crew, the challenges were equally daunting. Richard Marquand, stepping in as director, navigated the delicate balance of executing his own vision while accommodating Lucas's frequent presence on set. It was like directing a film with your father looking over your shoulder, one crew member would later recall. The practical effects team faced seemingly impossible deadlines. The speeder bike chase through Endor's forests required inventing new technologies, with Industrial Light and Magic developing a breakthrough technique called go motion to create convincing blur effects for high-speed movements. Phil Tippett and his ILM team created over 60 different Ewok facial expressions for the film, each requiring detailed puppet work. A single Ewok reaction shot could take an entire day to film properly. Behind the seamless fantasy that audiences experienced was a grueling test of endurance for everyone involved. 16-hour days, technical failures, last-minute script changes. The reality of making Return of the Jedi was as far from the finished product as Tatooine is from Endor. And through it all, one question hung in the air. Could they possibly create an ending worthy of the trilogy that had changed cinema forever? Watch the scene where Luke finally confronts the Emperor. Most viewers focus on the dialogue, the lightning, the operatic battle of wills, but there's something happening that few notice. Mark Hamill's hands. Throughout this crucial sequence, Hamill's right hand remains gloved in black, a visual echo of his father's mechanical limb, a subtle reminder of Luke's potential to become what he fears. But when Luke finally casts aside his lightsaber, refusing to kill Vader, Hamill performs a nearly imperceptible gesture. His ungloved left hand moves forward slightly, while the black-gloved right hand pulls back. This wasn't in the script. It was Hamill's own interpretive choice, a physical manifestation of Luke choosing his humanity over the machine, compassion over power. Most viewers never consciously register it, yet it deepens the emotional impact of the scene in ways that dialogue alone never could. Similarly, Harrison Ford brings subtle dimensions to Han Solo that transform our understanding of the character. When Leia finally reveals that Luke is her brother, watch Ford's micro-expressions. There's relief, but also a flash of something more complex. A realization that the man he once dismissed as a kid is part of something larger than Solo can fully comprehend. It's a masterclass in conveying emotional depth without words. Then, there's the throne room design itself. Production. Designer Norman Reynolds created a space dominated by black and gray geometric shapes, except for one element. The elevator shaft that ultimately becomes the Emperor's doom is illuminated with stark red lighting. This visual foreshadowing sits in plain sight throughout the climactic scenes. Yet few viewers consciously notice this literal path to hell waiting in the background. Perhaps most significant is what happens when Vader finally removes his helmet. Most viewers focus on Sebastian Shaw's face, but the truly revelatory detail is in the sound design. As the helmet comes off, the mechanical breathing we've associated with Vader for 3 films is replaced by something else: labored, fragile human breathing. This subtle audio shift accomplishes something profound. It sonically represents Anakin's return to humanity in a way no dialogue could match. These seemingly small choices, a hand gesture, a micro-expression, a splash of color, a sound effect, aren't merely decorative. They're the hidden architecture that gives Return of the Jedi its emotional power. And they reveal the extraordinary craftsmanship that elevates this film from mere spectacle to enduring art. Now here's where it gets complicated. Almost none of these details were highlighted in the film's marketing or merchandising. The subtle character work disappeared beneath the commercial juggernaut that Star Wars had become. Behind the camera, a fundamental tension was shaping every aspect of Return of the Jedi. A conflict between creative vision and commercial considerations that would define not just this film, but the future of blockbuster filmmaking. After the commercial triumph but difficult production of The Empire Strikes Back, Lucas sought greater control over the final chapter of his saga. This led to his selection of Richard Marquand as director, a talented filmmaker, but one with less clout to challenge Lucas's decisions than Empire's Irvin Kershner had wielded. George was more involved with Jedi than he had been with Empire, producer Howard Kazanjian would later explain. He was on set almost every day, which created, let's call them, interesting dynamics. These interesting dynamics sometimes erupted into genuine creative conflicts. Lawrence Kasdan, co-writer of both Empire and Jedi, found himself increasingly at odds with Lucas over the trilogy's conclusion. Kasdan advocated for maintaining the darker, more complex tone established in Empire. Lucas, increasingly aware of Star Wars' appeal to younger audiences and the merchandising opportunities this created, pushed for a more accessible, triumphant ending. The Ewoks became the most visible battleground in this conflict. Originally conceived as Wookiees, these forest-dwelling creatures were reimagined as smaller, cuter beings, a decision many crew members privately questioned. Initial merchandising reports showed that Kenner Products anticipated Ewok toys would generate approximately $30 million in revenue within the first year of the film's release, a consideration that likely influenced their prominence in the final film. "I fought the Ewoks tooth and nail," Kasdan would later admit. "I thought they undermined the seriousness of what we were trying to do." But Lucas held firm, believing that the contrast between the primitive Ewoks and the technologically advanced Empire created a compelling David versus Goliath narrative. This tension extended to performance choices. Harrison Ford continued advocating for Han Solo to make the ultimate sacrifice. "I thought it would give the story gravitas and an emotional center," Ford explained years later. "But I didn't win that fight." Even Mark Hamill found himself caught in this creative tug-of-war. The script called for Luke to emerge from his confrontations with Vader and the Emperor triumphant and unscathed. Hamill pushed for more complexity, suggesting Luke should bear some visible scar from his brush with the dark side. The compromise was subtle. The black glove covering Luke's mechanical hand remains a visual echo of his father, a reminder of the darkness that now lives within him too. Perhaps most significantly, this conflict shaped the film's portrayal of the Empire's defeat. Early concepts suggested a more nuanced conclusion, with the power vacuum created by the Emperor's death leading to ongoing struggles. The final film instead presents a more definitive victory, complete with celebrations across the galaxy, added in later special editions. What emerged from these conflicts was neither purely Lucas's commercial vision nor the darker, more complex film that some of his collaborators imagined. It was something in between, a film with moments of genuine emotional power nested within a more broadly accessible framework. And this tension, this unresolved creative conflict, is precisely what makes Return of the Jedi Such a fascinating conclusion to the original trilogy. It's a film at war with itself, just as Luke Skywalker is at war with the darkness within him. The greatest irony of Return of the Jedi lies in its central theme: redemption. On screen, Darth Vader finds redemption through sacrifice, turning against the Emperor to save his son. It's the emotional culmination of the entire saga, a fallen hero finding his way back to the light. Off-screen, a different kind of redemption story was unfolding, one that wouldn't be fully appreciated for decades. When Return of the Jedi premiered in May 1983, critical reception was decidedly mixed. While audiences embraced the film, many critics viewed it as a step down from The Empire Strikes Back's emotional complexity. The New York Times called it, by far the dimmest adventure of the lot. Prominent critics dismissed the Ewoks as cynical merchandising ploys rather than meaningful additions to the Star Wars universe. The initial critical consensus for Return of the Jedi in 1983 resulted in a 75% positive rating among major publications, significantly lower than Star Wars, 93%, and The Empire Strikes Back, 82%, had received upon their releases. George Lucas, who had poured his creative life into the Star Wars saga for nearly a decade, found himself in the position of his own creation, misunderstood, judged, and dismissed by many in the filmmaking establishment he had helped revolutionize. "I was tired," Lucas would later admit. "We'd been working on Star Wars for 10 years. By the time Jedi was finished, I was just exhausted and ready to move on." The experience left such a mark that Lucas retreated from directing for 16 years following Jedi's completion. The filmmaker, who had changed cinema, would not direct another film until 1999's The Phantom Menace. Yet as the years passed, something remarkable happened. A generation of viewers who experienced Return of the Jedi as children grew up to become filmmakers, critics, and cultural commentators themselves. And they brought with them a profound appreciation for what Lucas and his team had accomplished. Elements once criticized, the Ewoks' defeat of the Empire, the emphasis on found family, the unabashedly hopeful conclusion, began to be recognized as purposeful choices rather than creative compromises. The film's insistence on redemption being possible for even the darkest figure in the galaxy became recognized as a powerful moral statement rather than narrative simplicity. In a cinematic landscape that increasingly embraced cynicism and moral ambiguity, Return of the Jedi's unflinching belief in redemption and its celebration of compassion as strength began to seem not just quaint, but quietly revolutionary. The ultimate irony? A film centered on redemption needed redemption itself, a reconsideration that would only come with time, perspective, and the recognition that sometimes the greatest artistic statements are those that risk sentimentality in service of genuine emotion. Like Anakin Skywalker himself, Return of the Jedi would eventually be recognized not for its flaws, but for the light that had always lived within it. While audiences cheered and critics debated, something truly revolutionary was happening behind the scenes of Return of the Jedi. Something that would transform filmmaking forever. Industrial Light and Magic, Lucas's effects company, was pushing the boundaries of what was possible on screen. The speeder bike chase through Endor's forests required technical innovations that had never been attempted before. Traditional stop-motion techniques couldn't capture the necessary sense of speed and motion blur. Enter Dennis Muren and his team, who developed a breakthrough technique called Go Motion. Unlike traditional stop-motion, which produces staccato movements, Go Motion introduced controlled motion blur by moving the miniature during exposure. The result was a sequence that looked genuinely fast, dangerous, and real, despite being created with miniatures and blue-screen technology. But the true breakthrough was happening in a different department altogether. Ben Burtt, The sound designer, who had already created iconic audio elements like lightsaber hums and Vader's breathing, was pioneering techniques that would establish sound design as a crucial storytelling element rather than mere technical necessity. For the Emperor's Force lightning effects, sound designer Ben Burt recorded the sound of a Tesla coil, combined with slowed-down animal screams, creating an effect so viscerally disturbing that it influenced how the visual effect was ultimately designed. Burt's approach to the Emperor's throne room scenes revealed his genius. The space isn't just visually imposing, it's sonically designed to create dread. The low-frequency hum that pervades these scenes operates below the conscious threshold for many viewers, creating anxiety through sound alone. When the Emperor's Force lightning erupts, the contrast is all the more shocking because of how the soundscape has prepared us. These technical innovations coincided with a narrative breakthrough. Return of the Jedi accomplished something few concluding chapters manage. It resolved its central conflicts while expanding its universe. The revelation of Leia as Luke's sister, the Emperor's direct confrontation with Luke, the redemption of Anakin Skywalker, these elements provided closure while simultaneously opening new storytelling possibilities. This delicate balance, concluding satisfyingly while leaving viewers wanting more, would become the template for franchise filmmaking for decades to come. Before Return of the Jedi, film trilogies typically ended with definitive closure. After it, the possibility of continuation became built into the DNA of blockbuster storytelling. Perhaps most significantly, the film broke through limitations in character development rarely seen in effects-driven spectacles. Darth Vader's arc from villain to redeemed father represents one of cinema's most emotionally complex journeys, in what might otherwise have been dismissed as mere space fantasy. This insistence that even pulp storytelling could carry profound emotional weight would influence filmmakers from Peter Jackson to Christopher Nolan. What audiences in 1983 could not have known was that they were witnessing not just the conclusion of a beloved trilogy, but the birth of modern blockbuster filmmaking, where technical innovation serves character development, where sound becomes a storytelling partner equal to visuals, and where even the most fantastical stories can carry genuine emotional resonance. The true breakthrough of Return of the Jedi wasn't visible on opening weekend. It would only become clear as its influence rippled through cinema for decades to come. When the credits rolled on Return of the Jedi in 1983, few could have predicted how profoundly it would shape not just cinema, but broader culture. The ripples from this film would spread outward, transforming everything they touched. For the cast, the film's conclusion brought both opportunity and challenge. Harrison Ford successfully escaped typecasting, building a career that would include Indiana Jones, Jack Ryan, and Rick Deckard. Mark Hamill, finding leading film roles scarce after such iconic performance, reinvented himself as one of the most celebrated voice actors in animation, most notably as the Joker in Batman, the animated series. Carrie Fisher emerged as a brilliant writer, her novels and memoirs bringing the same wit and insight that made Leia unforgettable. For industrial light and magic, the technical boundaries pushed during Jedi's production established them as the premier effects house in the industry, a position they maintain to this day. Techniques pioneered for seemingly simple shots, like the speeder bike chase, would evolve into the digital tools that later made films like Jurassic Park and Terminator 2 possible. Between 1983 and 1999, ILM would contribute groundbreaking visual effects to over 140 major films, with techniques developed during Return of the Jedi directly influencing their approach to later landmarks like The Abyss, 1989, and Terminator 2, 1991. In the realm of merchandising and marketing, Jedi cemented what A New Hope had started. The film's integration of storytelling and merchandising potential created a template that transformed how studios approached blockbuster filmmaking. For better or worse, the question, "Will this make a good toy?" became a legitimate creative consideration in Hollywood. The film's treatment of redemption, the insistence that even the darkest villain could find a way back to light, influenced countless subsequent stories. From Severus Snape in Harry Potter to Kylo Ren in the Star Wars sequel trilogy, the possibility of redemption for seemingly irredeemable characters became a storytelling staple, with Vader's journey as the touchstone. Most significantly, Return of the Jedi established the concept of the expanded universe, the idea that a film's story could continue beyond what was shown on screen. The questions left deliberately unanswered. What happens after the Empire falls? How does Leia develop her Force abilities? Created space for novels, comics, games, and eventually new films to explore. This approach to storytelling, creating films that stand alone but hint at a larger universe waiting to be explored, is now the dominant model for franchise filmmaking. The Marvel Cinematic Universe, the DC Extended Universe, the Conjuring Universe, all operate on a template that Return of the Jedi helped establish, satisfying endings that nevertheless leave doors open for continuation. Even our cultural vocabulary has been shaped by this film. Return of the Jedi has become shorthand for any triumphant comeback. References to the Emperor and the concept of bringing balance to the Force appear everywhere, from political commentary to sports analysis. The image of Vader's redemption, a father sacrificing himself for his child, has become a visual archetype referenced across media. What began as the conclusion to George Lucas's space fantasy became something far more significant, a cultural cornerstone that influenced not just how stories are told, but how they're marketed, merchandised, expanded, and remembered. The greatest films don't just entertain us for their runtime, they change how we see everything that comes after. By that measure, Return of the Jedi's power has only grown with each passing year. 4 decades after its release, Return of the Jedi continues to captivate new generations of viewers. But why? What gives this film its staying power when so many of its contemporaries have faded from cultural memory? The answer lies not in its groundbreaking effects, though they were revolutionary, nor in its commercial success, though it was substantial. Return of the Jedi endures because it dared to place genuine emotion at the center of spectacular fantasy, and because the people who created it cared deeply about the story they were telling. Beneath the space battles and lightsaber duels lies a profoundly human story about the possibility of redemption. Darth Vader, the embodiment of technological terror and oppression, ultimately finds salvation through the most human act imaginable: a parent's love for their child. This emotional core resonates across cultural boundaries and generations because it speaks to something universal. The film's production history reveals that this emotional authenticity wasn't accidental. It emerged from the genuine creative investment of its cast and crew, often against commercial pressures. Mark Hamill's insistence on preserving Luke's vulnerability, Harrison Ford's push for emotional stakes, Carrie Fisher's hard-won wisdom infusing Leia's strength. These elements weren't in the marketing materials, but they're what give the film its lasting power. Even the elements that received the most criticism initially, the Ewoks, the somewhat neat resolution of the Empire's defeat, take on new significance when viewed through this lens. The Ewoks represent hope in its most primitive form, that courage and community can triumph over technological superiority and oppression. In an increasingly complex world, this straightforward moral clarity doesn't feel simplistic. It feels necessary. Return of the Jedi also endures because it respects its audience. Beneath its accessible adventure lies genuine moral complexity. Luke confronts not just external enemies, but the darkness within himself. Vader's redemption comes not through easy forgiveness, but through painful sacrifice. The film doesn't reduce good and evil to simplistic categories. It shows how they coexist, how choices matter, how redemption requires both grace and accountability. Perhaps most significantly, Return of the Jedi endures because it offers something increasingly rare in our cynical age: authentic hope. Not the saccharine optimism of denial, but the hard-won hope that acknowledges darkness while insisting on the possibility of light. The film's final images, celebration across the galaxy, ancestral spirits at peace, aren't merely happy endings. They're reminders that even in the midst of seemingly insurmountable darkness, transformation remains possible. This is the hidden power of Return of the Jedi that most fans never consciously realize. Beneath the spectacle lies a profound meditation on what it means to find your way back from darkness, to choose compassion over power, to see the humanity in those we've deemed monsters. When we understand this, when we recognize the genuine emotional intelligence behind the lightsabers and space battles, we see Return of the Jedi not just as the conclusion of a beloved trilogy, but as a work of enduring moral imagination. And that's a power greater than any Death Star. The true story of Return of the Jedi isn't found in behind-the-scenes documentaries or press junkets. It lives in the space between what we see on screen and the complex reality of its creation, in the tensions, compromises, and unexpected triumphs that shaped a cultural landmark. The next time you watch the film, look closer. See Mark Hamill's subtle gesture choices that reveal Luke's inner conflict. Notice Carrie Fisher's eyes in moments of quiet resolution. Hear the carefully constructed soundscape that tells a story beneath the dialogue. These aren't accidents. They're the deliberate choices of artists bringing their full humanity to what could have been mere spectacle. Remember that behind each frame was a cast fighting for emotional truth within commercial constraints, a crew pushing technical boundaries to realize impossible visions, a filmmaker concluding a story that had consumed a decade of his life. The miracle isn't that Return of the Jedi exists. It's that it exists with such heart. If you enjoyed this deeper look at the film that changed cinema forever, hit the like button and share which revelation surprised you most in the comments below. Sometimes the greatest stories are the ones hiding in plain sight, just waiting for us to see them with fresh eyes.